If our economy is based on borrowing, based on credit, based on loans, based on a fiat currency that's not really backed by anything but the trust in the government, how safe is our economy? Should we be worried about some of the concerns with banks? Should we be worried about our retirement? Should we be worried about just our dollars in general? Today's video is going to be good. We're going to talk about some concerns and issues that are brought up this last week that I don't think that we're paying much attention to, but it may be a trend that we need to start looking at. Guys, today's video is going to be a good one. We're going to talk about your money, and it all starts right now. Hey guys, welcome to The Max. We appreciate you being here. If you're new to The Max, go down here, press subscribe, ring the bell, give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I'm okay with that, but let us know what you think about the video. It does help us in the algorithm and making sure our content is getting out there. When you comment and you like this video, it does mean a lot to us too as well. So thank you so much for being here. Let's jump into the video today. If we think of our economy, especially over the last few years, how volatile it is or how safe it is, we need to look at a few things. Now, we've talked about inflation. We've talked about interest rates. Those things are in the news just about every day. We see that because interest rates are going up, it's causing some issues. We also see inflation because it's staying high. We see some issues. Number one is lease and rents, not just on the residential side, but on the commercial side. One thing that the last few years did is it put a lot of people working remote. Well, there's been studies that came out that said, where banks and financial institutions gave a lot of funds by rental property, such as office space, such as big buildings, to make sure that they can house several businesses in. Well, sadly, you're starting to see a lot of those malls, a lot of those office buildings, a lot of those commercial style buildings that have a lot of leases and tenants in it. They're all starting to struggle because we're starting to see offices and workers not need bricks and mortar anymore. They're working strictly from home. So technology, although it's good, it's causing some issues with our money and with creditors and banking. Some of these companies that thought this was a safe and secure investment, an opportunity to borrow money and maybe make some money on some rent and lease, especially on the commercial side, are starting to struggle. Some cities are saying 30 to 40% of their office spaces are not being filled anymore because of remote jobs. So even though we're enjoying time at home, even though we want people at home with their families and we push family time, we hope that you're spending some family time. But this is one of those problems that because we're in a borrowing style fiat currency movement of money, when we look at the fact that this money is not actually money, or we look at the fact that people borrow too much, we're seeing issues with rent and lease payments because maybe the investors didn't have all the money to pay for the property. Now, instead of selling it maybe at a loss or maybe holding on to it until the market trend changes, a lot of those are going to start going belly up. If we start seeing more issues with our rent and lease payments and we start seeing issues with small business and investors in that market, will it be a concern? Well, we've talked about the residential rent and lease. No, those prices have went up. On one side, people can't hardly afford to live in a home. On the other side, businesses are struggling to hold on to these office buildings and these big properties because they thought the tenants were going to be there. It's a major concern that we need to be focusing on when it comes to the economy. Is it going to cause more businesses to fail? Is it going to cause banks to have to short sale or to default on some of these investors who own these properties? It is something to think about. Number two, we know that the interest rate was just raised again. I do not see the point of the Fed. I don't respect them. I think that they are manipulating our money each and every year, some way or some fashion. Well, they laxed on policies to keep printing money the last few years, and then also now they're tightening down so much, it's making the economy really strained. Well, on top of the rent and lease issues, you're starting to see people not borrow money as much. Now that could be a good thing because I want you to understand that you don't need to just borrow everything that you do. But like we talked about, our economy is based on people borrowing money. And even though we don't like it, it's going to cause an issue. So because the interest rates have went up, real estate and home buying is down, especially on the borrowing side. Now we see a lot of people with cash and some bigger players in the games, they're buying property. and they're buying it with cash. They're putting their money somewhere. So that doesn't really affect the bank as much as in saying it's good or bad. They're more neutral in it because the bank is not needed. Well, for our economy to move, it needs people to borrow money from the bank to make money on the money, and of course the economy keeps on going. Now again, I'm not for borrowing money, but what we are seeing is people are not borrowing money for vehicles anymore. The used car market and the new car market is down. Now the cost is still high, but people are not purchasing as much because they can't afford the payments. Secondly, we're seeing the housing market struggle. As I said, people buying houses right now are not the people borrowing money to buy the houses. It's the people taking their money out of the bank to put their money in real estate. So again, we see banks struggling because what's happening is the depositors are now pulling money out, almost like a bank run, or trying to get a safe place to put their money, and they're putting it in real estate. So they're buying the property because the housing market is down because people are not borrowing as much, so therefore it's making the houses and the prices of homes go down. Well, when that happens, then the bigger players take their money out of the bank and then buy the houses. So they're taking advantage of the dip. Nothing's wrong with that. But again, I go back to the people who can buy are not buying it on debt, which is a good thing, but hurts the economy. And the people who need to buy property instead of paying these high rents can't afford it because their inflation and also the interest rates are up. And so therefore they're not purchasing and they're not borrowing money. So that is a concern. Big players buying things and not using the debt to do it, which again, don't like debt, but our economy is based on that. And then the people who need to borrow money to buy the car, to buy the home, are not doing it because they can't afford it. So that's a concern, and that's going to make some volatility in our market. Thirdly, we hear all these countries, such as the BRICS countries, pulling away from our petrodollar. They're moving towards manipulating their own currency. Saudi Arabia, we've had somewhat of a decent relationship over the years with. That kind of helps our petrodollar, and it keeps us being the world reserve in currency. But if we moved away from that, the concern would be, how valuable is our dollar? If we were back on the gold standard, our value is based on gold and the gold that we have. That's what our currency would be based on. Well, we're in a fiat currency where we're printing money like crazy, and it's based on the fact of the trust in the U.S. government and how strong our personal economy is, and also the fact that it is the world reserve currency, and that's how people buy their fuel. With Saudi Arabia and all these other countries, which I don't blame them because here we are preaching against fossil fuels and the sale of a whole, we're preaching against it, but at the same time, we want them to hold our petrodollar as the currency so we can manipulate the world based on what our dollar's worth. That's a concern because if you start seeing people pull away from the petrodollar, that's going to make the dollar fall. With the dollar falling, it's going to make America's value and the trust in America's dollar go down, which will make our currency overall, I wouldn't say implode, but cause a major problem with the dollar. Well, if the dollar is struggling and it's not based on anything other than the trust in the government, what are we seeing? Well, we saw bank runs last week. If we see that in extent, if we see that in a more rapid pace, and again, I hope that doesn't happen, but if we see that more, if our trust is not in our government and then we start making bank runs, those bank runs are backed by the government, by FDIC, well, we see that FDIC is not just backing the limits that they've put in place, they're going to turn around and back everybody. How strong is our government and can it back everybody? Well, if they back everybody, then it comes down to what is your dollar's worth? Because they've printed extra billions and hundreds of billions and a few trillion maybe to cover all your money in the depositors, then all of a sudden you've got piles of cash at your home. All these countries are not buying cash and not using cash in their economies because they don't need it with the petrodollar because they're using something else now to buy their fuel. So all of a sudden we see all these mass dollars come in. Our economy is struggling already. We're printing more money. So therefore the rate of inflation goes up even though the interest is going up too. Now that was a lot said, but think about it. It all comes down to we are getting mad that we're using fossil fuels. So we push against that because of these climate emergencies or climate change initiatives. However, we want our dollar to be what everybody buys fuel with. So if all of a sudden Saudi Arabia says, we're going to take other currencies, and they're already starting. But what if they say, you know what, we are not being backed by the petrodollar? How valuable is our currency? If people are not having to buy our dollars to then turn around and buy the fossil fuels or the oil, the petroleum, and they start buying in yuans or they start buying in their own currency, then our market will be flooded with dollars. And then all of a sudden our banks struggle. Inflation goes up. Our dollars won't be worth anything. We'll look like Venezuela or Argentina or Sri Lanka. We've seen these same problems happen in these countries, and somehow we don't want to look at them to say, you know what, this kind of socialist climate change initiative / print money when we need it, it works. It doesn't work. We see it's failing in these other countries. So that's a concern that we need to have. A few things to kind of heal all that. We've got to move back to a gold standard. The Fed, China, Russia, they're buying gold. So if those countries are buying gold, they're starting to build a new currency. What are we doing, and why are we not doing that? Why is our Fed buying a lot of gold if they believe that fiat currency is going to always be around and they're not going to need gold? Why is the Fed buying gold? Should we be buying gold? If we see a reboot or a reset, should we have had gold? Well, I think that's what we're going to see. And again, I'm not advising you. I personally am buying gold because my goal is, if we can see the fact that our currency is going to struggle and we see a reboot or a change in transactions or a change in currency, what has more value? Something that is world renowned, such as gold or precious metal, silver, things that we know that can be bartered or used as currency worldwide? Or are we going to go back to the paper cash that is based on the trust of the U.S. government, which would be struggling without the petrodollar? And again, the piles of debt that we have as a nation. That's a lot to think about. Now, do I not hold cash? Yes, I hold cash right now, for sure. Because right now, cash does still have value. But if we start seeing some of these ramifications happen, people not borrowing money, we go into more of a recession. We see the petrodollar being pulled away from more and more. Then we need to look at options such as real estate. We need to look at options such as precious metals, food, bartering needs, and tangible goods. I go back to gold, silver, and things like that. We've talked about that in a lot of videos, but as a prepper, we need to really see what's happening. Yes, interest rates. Yes, inflation. But when we start seeing rent and lease issues, not only on the residential side, but on the commercial side, then we start seeing people not borrowing money, which is that's where our economy is based on, is people borrowing money and loans and not really having tons of cash. Or gold standard is based on debts. And then all of a sudden we see these countries and we see people pulling away from our dollar. Those are three concerns that we need to be paying attention to. We need to look back at what history showed us. We look biblically, we see that Joseph stockpiled food because of droughts, because of famines, and because of issues and pestilence coming, okay? Then we look back in history to see gold standard. Gold standard has always been a major part of world currency. Then we see bartering needs. What is good for someone else? Is it the skills that you can provide? Is it the bartering goods such as food, such as commodities, such as, well, if my neighbor needs this, then I need that. We can have that transaction, that decentralized parallel style economy of bartering. We need to look at those options again, because the concerns of our economy and the safety of our economy is based on just hope. That's what's so sad. We have no basis anymore. If we're not on the gold standard, we are not a strong economy. We're pushing tons of money and printing tons of money that we really shouldn't be printing, dealing with wars we shouldn't be in, or in situations where we're wanting to just give money away to cover even these bank situations. There's just a lot of volatility in our economy. So fall back on things that we saw in history: food, commodities, precious metals, and bartering needs. When we cover our basis in that way, tangible assets. If you can afford some homes, like I said, buy in the dip. It's a great time to buy if you can just purchase with your cash. I wouldn't borrow money at 7 or 8 or 9% right now. Even though banks may want you to do that, that might not be a smart policy. So be careful on borrowing money right now, because it's high. It costs a lot of money. You're a slave to the lender, so be careful on any money that you have, any money that you've borrowed. Try to get out of those debts, because I think we're going to see a lot more volatility in the next few years. The less debt that we owe personally, the more safety and security, as in precious metals, maybe some self-defense items, and foods and commodities we have, I think the better we are when we hedge against the problems that our economy will throw at us. So, is our economy safe? I don't know. You have to answer that for yourself. I'm just a guy from South Mississippi saying the common sense approach is look at what's happening when it comes to rent, leases, borrowing money, and the fact that people are pulling away from our dollar. It's a concern that we need to be wary of. Guys, thank you so much for watching us. We hope that you've enjoyed this video. Let us know what you think about it. Tell us what you think about these 3 items and the concerns that we talked about today. And then also, what are you doing to hedge against some of the dangers of our economy? More than anything, we hope that you always rely on Christ, because our true hope should always be based back in God and in his son Jesus, who can help you get through anything in your life. God bless, guys. Happy homesteading, y'all.